I am 28 years old, female, and my stepmom showed our pastor a forged letter where my dad supposedly disowned me from his will. It all started a month after my father passed away. The grief was still a raw, open wound, a constant ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe. My dad had been my anchor, the one person in the world who truly understood me. His death from a sudden heart attack had shattered my world into a million tiny pieces. My stepmom, Brenda, had been married to him for 10 years. Our relationship was civil, but never warm. She was a woman who valued appearances above all else. She had a smile that was always a little too bright, a laugh that never quite reached her eyes. In the weeks following the funeral, she had wrapped herself in the role of the grieving widow, accepting casseroles from neighbors and sighing dramatically whenever anyone mentioned my father's name. With me, however, she was different. The polite facade had crumbled, replaced by a cool indifference. She would answer my calls with clipped, one-word answers. When I came to the house I grew up in, she would watch me with narrowed eyes, as if I were an intruder. I tried to tell myself it was just her way of coping with the loss. We all grieve differently, I thought. But a small, nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered that it was something more. Something was wrong. The call from Pastor Mike came on a Tuesday morning. He had been our family's pastor for as long as I could remember. He had presided over my baptism, my confirmation, and just a few weeks ago, my father's funeral. His voice on the phone was heavy, laced with an unease that immediately put me on edge. "Sarah, can you come down to the church?" he asked. "There is something we need to discuss. Something about your father." I asked him what it was about. He hesitated. "It is better if we talk in person," he said. His tone was serious, and it sent a chill down my spine. I agreed to meet him in an hour. The drive to the church was a blur. My mind raced, trying to guess what this could possibly be about. Had my dad made some special arrangement for the church in his will? Had he confided something in the pastor before he died? I parked my car in the empty lot and walked up the stone steps to the heavy oak doors. The church was silent, a stark contrast to the bustling activity of a Sunday morning. The air inside was cool and smelled of old wood and hymnals. Pastor Mike was waiting for me in his office, a small, cluttered room lined with books. He was a kind man with a gentle face, but today his expression was troubled. He motioned for me to sit in the chair opposite his desk. "Thank you for coming, Sarah," he began, his fingers steepled together on his desk. "This is not an easy conversation to have." My heart started to beat a little faster. "What is it, Pastor Mike?" I asked. He took a deep breath and slid a single sheet of paper across the desk toward me. It was a letter, handwritten on my father's personal stationery. I recognized the familiar blue letterhead immediately. But as I started to read the words, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The letter was addressed to me. The handwriting was a near-perfect imitation of my father's elegant script, but the words were cruel. Alien things. It spoke of disappointment. It listed all the ways I had supposedly failed him. It said I had not lived up to my potential, that I had been a constant source of worry for him. And then came the final, devastating blow. The letter stated that he had decided to change his will, leaving everything to Brenda and her son, Kevin. It explicitly said that I was to receive nothing. It said he was disowning me. I stared at the paper, my vision blurring. The words swam before my eyes. This could not be real. This was a nightmare. My dad would never write something like this. He would never, ever say these things to me. We had been so close. He was my biggest supporter, my staunchest defender. He had always told me how proud he was of me. This letter was a betrayal of everything I knew about him. "Where did you get this?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Brenda brought it to me yesterday," Pastor Mike said softly. "She said your father wrote it a few days before he passed. She said he made her promise not to show it to anyone until after the funeral. She claimed it was his true and final testament, a weight on his soul that he needed to unburden. I looked up at him, my eyes pleading. "You do not believe this, do you?" I asked. "You knew my dad. You know he would never do this." The pastor looked down at his hands. He looked deeply uncomfortable. "The handwriting it is very convincing, Sarah," he said. And Brenda was very emotional. She seemed genuinely heartbroken to have to share it. I felt a cold, hard knot of anger forming in my stomach. Brenda, of course. Her crocodile tears, her dramatic performance. It was all a lie. She had orchestrated this whole thing. I did not know how, but I knew with every fiber of my being that this letter was a forgery. It was a cruel, calculated attempt to steal my inheritance and, worse, to poison my memory of my father. She was trying to take the one thing I had left of him, his love for me, and twist it into something ugly and false. I stood up, my hands shaking. I needed to get out of there. I needed to think. "I have to go," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Pastor Mike stood up as well. "Sarah, I am so sorry," he said. "If there is anything I can do." I could not even look at him. I turned and walked out of his office, the cruel words of the letter echoing in my head. As I walked out of the silent church and into the bright sunlight, I made a promise to myself. I would not let her get away with this. I would fight for my father's memory. I would expose her lies. I would find the truth. And I would make her pay for what she had done. This was no longer just about money. It was about justice for my dad. The first thing I did when I got home was call my best friend, Jessica. We had known each other since kindergarten, and she was more like a sister to me. She answered on the second ring, her cheerful voice a stark contrast to the turmoil churning inside me. "Hey you," she said. "What is up?" I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. A sob escaped my lips, and then I was crying. The kind of deep, racking sobs that come from the very core of your being. "Whoa, Sarah, what is wrong?" Jessica's voice was filled with alarm. "What happened?" Through my tears, I managed to tell her everything. I told her about the meeting with Pastor Mike, about the letter, about the horrible, cruel words that were supposedly my father's. I read parts of it to her over the phone, my voice cracking with each word. When I was done, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "That witch," Jessica finally said, her voice low and furious. "That absolute conniving witch." Her anger was a balm to my raw nerves. It was validating to hear someone else say what I was feeling. "You do not think it is real, do you?" I asked, needing to hear her say it. "Real? Sarah, are you kidding me?" She scoffed. "Your dad worshipped you. He told my mom just last month that you were the best thing that ever happened to him. He would never, ever write something like that. This has Brenda's slimy fingerprints all over it." We spent the next hour dissecting the letter. I had taken a picture of it with my phone before I left the pastor's office, an act of foresight I was now incredibly grateful for. We analyzed the phrasing, the word choices. "Remember how your dad always said, 'on the other hand'?" Jessica pointed out. "He used that phrase all the time. It is not in here once." "And he always signed his letters with love and pride," I added, a fresh wave of grief washing over me. "This one just says, 'Sincerely, George.'" The more we talked, the more certain I became. The letter was a fake. A very good fake, but a fake nonetheless. Brenda must have spent hours, maybe even days, practicing my father's handwriting, studying his letters, trying to capture his style. But she had missed the little things, the nuances that made his voice unique. She had captured the form, but not the spirit. I knew I needed to talk to Brenda, to confront her. But I had to be smart about it. I could not just go in screaming and accusing. That would only make her dig her heels in. I needed to play her game. I needed to be calm and collected, to gather information without letting on that I knew she was lying. After I hung up with Jessica, I took a few deep breaths and dialed Brenda's number. She answered with a sigh, as if my call was a terrible imposition. "Hello, Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Brenda, I just came from the church," I said, keeping my own voice as steady as I could. "Pastor Mike showed me a letter." There was a pause. "Oh, that," she said, her voice softening into a practiced tone of sorrow. "Yes, it was so sad. I found it in your father's desk. I did not know what to do. He made me promise. It was so hard for him at the end, you know. He was very conflicted." "It did not sound like him," I said, testing the waters. "Grief makes us see what we want to see, dear," she said, her voice patronizing. "He loved you, of course he did, but he was also very disappointed. You have to accept that." Her words were like daggers. She was using my grief against me, trying to make me doubt my own memories of my father. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. But it also hardened my resolve. She was too smooth, too rehearsed. This was a performance, and I was not going to be her audience. "I see," I said, my voice cold. "Well, I just wanted to let you know I saw it." "I am sorry you had to find out that way, Sarah," she said, laying the fake sympathy on thick. "We will get through this as a family." I hung up the phone, my hand shaking with rage. Family. She had the nerve to use that word after what she had done. There was no we. There was only her and me. And this was war. I knew my first real step had to be finding the actual will. My dad was a meticulous man. He would have had a will, a proper one, drafted by a lawyer. He had even mentioned it to me a few months before he passed. We were having dinner at his favorite Italian restaurant, and he had been talking about getting his affairs in order. "Everything is taken care of, kiddo," he had said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. "The house goes to Brenda, of course. But my savings are split 3 ways between you, her, and Kevin, and your mother's jewelry. That is all for you." I made sure of that. I remembered the conversation so clearly. He had been so reassuring, so matter-of-fact. The idea that he would have secretly written a letter disowning me just a few months later was ludicrous. He had used a lawyer for everything, a man named Mr. Thompson. His office was downtown, a 40-minute drive away. I knew that was where I had to go next. I needed to see the real will, the one he had told me about. That would be the first piece of concrete evidence I had against Brenda. The next morning, I called Mr. Thompson's office. A crisp, efficient-sounding secretary answered the phone. I explained who I was and that I needed to make an appointment to discuss my father's will. "Mr. Thompson is handling the estate of George Peterson, yes," she said, her tone cool and professional. "However, the executor of the will is Brenda Peterson. All inquiries must go through her." "I understand that," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "But I am his daughter. I have a right to see the will." "I am sorry, but Mr. Thompson is extremely busy," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "He is in meetings all day. I can take a message, but I cannot promise when he will be able to get back to you." It was a dead end. She was stonewalling me, and I had a sinking feeling that Brenda had already gotten to her, coached her on what to say if I called. I knew then that a phone call was not going to be enough. I had to go there in person. I had to make them see me, to deal with me face to face. I got in my car and started the drive downtown. The city traffic was heavy, and the slow crawl of cars gave me too much time to think. I kept replaying my last conversation with my dad in my head. It had been just 2 days before he died. He had called me just to see how I was doing. We talked for almost an hour, about my work at the library, about a new book I was reading, about his plans for the garden that spring. He had sounded so happy, so full of life. There was not a hint of disappointment or conflict in his voice. He had ended the call the way he always did. "I love you, Sarah Bear," he had said, using the nickname he had given me when I was a little girl. "I am so proud of you." Tears welled up in my eyes as I remembered his voice. How could Brenda try to steal that from me? How could she be so cruel? By the time I found a parking garage and walked the 2 blocks to Mr. Thompson's office building, my sadness had once again hardened into determination. I was not leaving that office until I got some answers. The law firm of Thompson, Finch, and Associates was on the 12th floor. The reception area was plush and quiet, all dark wood and leather chairs. The same secretary I had spoken to on the phone sat behind a large, imposing desk. She looked up as I approached, her expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "Can I help you?" she asked, though her tone suggested she had no intention of helping me at all. "I'm Sarah Peterson," I said, standing my ground. "I am here to see Mr. Thompson. As I told you on the phone, he is in meetings all day," she said, her voice sharp. "You cannot just show up without an appointment." "Then I will wait," I said. I walked over to one of the leather chairs and sat down. I picked up a magazine from the table in front of me and opened it, pretending to read. I could feel her eyes on me, but I refused to be intimidated. I was prepared to sit in that chair all day if I had to. I watched the clock on the wall tick by. 10 minutes, 20. An hour passed. The secretary occasionally shot me a venomous glare, but I did not move. I just sat there, turning the pages of the magazine, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt like a child waiting outside the principal's office. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a door opened and an elderly man in a suit walked out, followed by a younger man with graying hair and a tired expression. I assumed the younger man was Mr. Thompson. As the secretary stood up to see the client out, I saw my chance. I stood up and walked directly toward Mr. Thompson. "Mr. Thompson?" I said, my voice stronger than I expected it to be. "I am Sarah Peterson, George Peterson's daughter. I need to talk to you for 5 minutes." He looked startled. The secretary rushed over, her face flushed with anger. "I am so sorry, Mr. Thompson," she said. This woman refused to leave. He held up a hand to silence her. He looked at me, his eyes appraising. "Sarah Peterson," he said. "Yes, I have your father's file. Come into my office." I shot the secretary a triumphant look as I followed him into his office. It was a corner office with a large window overlooking the city. He closed the door and gestured for me to sit down. "What can I do for you, Miss Peterson?" he asked, his tone wary. I took a deep breath and explained everything. I told him about the letter Brenda had shown to the pastor. I told him about the conversation I had with my dad, where he had explicitly laid out his intentions for the will. "I know that letter is a fake," I finished, my voice filled with conviction. "I need to see the will he filed with you, the real one." Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair and sighed. He looked tired. "Miss Peterson," he said, "your stepmother Brenda came to see me last week. She is the executor of the estate." "I know that," I said. "But—" He cut me off. "She brought me a document," he continued. "A codicil to your father's will. It was dated just 3 days before his passing. It was a handwritten letter, signed by your father, and it was notarized. It essentially functions as an amendment to the original will, and it supersedes any previous instructions." My blood ran cold. A codicil. Notarized. This was worse than I thought. A simple letter shown to a pastor was one thing. A notarized legal document was another entirely. Brenda had been thorough. "It is the same letter she showed the pastor, is it not?" I asked, my voice flat. "Yes," he said. "The letter in which he changes the distribution of his assets." He was being diplomatic, but I knew what he meant. The letter that disowned me. "I want to see it," I said. "I want to see the notarized copy." He shook his head. "I am sorry, I cannot do that," he said. "My client is Brenda Peterson, the executor. I cannot show you documents from the file without her permission. It is a matter of client confidentiality." "She is my stepmother, and he was my father," I said, my voice rising. "I have a right to know what is going on." "Your legal right is to be notified by the executor of the will's contents once it is filed with the probate court," he said calmly. Until then, my hands are tied. I am sorry. I felt a surge of helpless frustration. It was a bureaucratic nightmare. Brenda had locked me out, using the very legal system that was supposed to protect me. I stood up, defeated. There was nothing more I could do here. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Thompson," I said, my voice tight with unshed tears. I walked out of the office, past the smug-looking secretary, and into the elevator. As the doors closed, I leaned against the wall, the full weight of the situation crashing down on me. Brenda had not just forged a letter. She had forged a legal document. She had gotten it notarized. She was not just being cruel. She was committing a serious crime. This was not just a family dispute anymore. This was fraud. As I drove home, my mind was racing. The notary. That was the weak link. A notary is a public official. They have to follow strict rules. They have to verify the identity of the person signing the document. They have to witness the signature themselves. If Brenda had forged my dad's signature, how had she gotten it notarized? Had she found a corrupt notary? Or had the notary been tricked somehow? I needed to find out who this person was. My next step was to talk to my stepbrother, Kevin. He was Brenda's son from her first marriage. He and I had never been close. He was a few years older than me, and we had little in common. He had always been his mother's son, quick to take her side in any disagreement. But he was also not the sharpest tool in the shed. I thought that maybe if I approached him carefully, he might let something slip. I called him that evening. He sounded surprised to hear from me. "Hey, Sarah," he said. "What is up?" "I just wanted to talk about Dad," I said, trying to sound sad and confused, not angry. "And this letter he wrote. Mom told you about it, right?" "Yeah, she did," he said, his voice dropping. "It is rough, I know. I was shocked too. But Dad was under a lot of stress toward the end. The doctor said his heart was weak." He was parroting his mother's lines. It was so obvious he had been coached. But I pressed on. "I know," I said. "It is just so hard to process. Mom must be having a terrible time with all this legal stuff, having to go to the lawyer and everything." "Oh yeah, it has been a lot for her," he said, falling into the trap. "She was running around like crazy last week. She had to go meet her friend Gina to get it all sorted out before she could even see the lawyer." My ears perked up. Gina. I knew that name. Gina was Brenda's best friend. They had known each other for years. They went on shopping trips together, had lunch every week. And I remembered something else about Gina. Something I had overheard Brenda mention at a family barbecue last summer. Gina finally got her notary license, Brenda had announced proudly. "So if anyone needs anything stamped, you know who to call." My heart started to pound. Gina, Brenda's best friend, was the notary. This was not just a weak link. This was a smoking gun. There was no way a legitimate notarization had taken place. Either Gina was in on the fraud, or Brenda had forged the signature in front of her and Gina had looked the other way. The whole thing stank of conspiracy. Kevin had no idea what he had just given me. He had thought he was just making small talk, but he had handed me the key to unraveling his mother's entire scheme. I ended the call quickly, my mind buzzing with this new information. I now had a name. Gina. And I was going to find out everything I could about her, and about what happened on the day she supposedly watched my father sign away his daughter's inheritance. The discovery that Brenda's best friend was the notary changed everything. It shifted the puzzle pieces in my mind, and a dark picture began to form. This was not a spontaneous act of greed. This was a premeditated plan. Brenda and Gina must have cooked this up together. The thought made me feel sick to my stomach. My dad had always been kind to Gina. He had treated her like family. And this is how she repaid him? By helping to desecrate his memory and steal from his daughter? The motive was painfully clear. Pure, unadulterated greed. Brenda wanted the entire inheritance for herself and for Kevin. My father's savings were not a fortune, but it was a comfortable sum, enough to set someone up for life. She was not content with her third, or with the house he had already left her. She wanted it all. and she was willing to commit a federal crime to get it. My next step was to prove it. I needed to prove that the signature on the letter, the codicil, was a forgery. And I needed to prove that the notarization was fraudulent. I decided to tackle the signature first. I spent the entire weekend going through my father's old things, which were stored in boxes in my attic. It was an emotional and painful process. I opened boxes filled with old photographs, letters he had written to me when I was at summer camp, birthday cards he had sent me every year without fail. Each time I saw his familiar handwriting, a fresh wave of grief would wash over me. But I pushed through the pain, my anger giving me strength. I was looking for clear, clean examples of his signature. I found a treasure trove. Old bank checks, a copy of his passport, the deed to the house, and dozens of cards and letters, all signed with his distinctive flourish. I carefully laid them all out on my dining room table. Then, I pulled up the photo I had taken of the forged letter on my phone and zoomed in on the signature. At first glance, it was almost perfect. Brenda had clearly practiced. She had captured the slant, the size, the general shape of the letters. But as I looked closer, I started to see the tiny imperfections, the little tells that gave her away. My dad had a very specific way of looping the G in his first name, George. It was a quick, fluid motion. The G on the forged letter was hesitant, drawn carefully rather than written. The pressure of the pen was also different. My dad wrote with a light, confident hand. The forged signature was heavier, the ink slightly thicker in places, as if the writer had paused for a moment to steady their hand. They were small details, things that most people would never notice. But I had spent my entire life looking at my father's handwriting. I knew it as well as I knew my own face. And I knew with absolute certainty that he had not signed that letter. Now I had to convince other people. I knew my opinion would not be enough in a court of law. I needed an expert. I spent hours online, researching handwriting analysts and forensic document examiners. I found a highly recommended expert in a nearby city and sent him an email, explaining the situation. He was expensive, but I did not care. I would use every penny of my savings to expose Brenda's lies. I sent him high-resolution scans of the authentic signatures I had found, along with the photo of the forgery. He told me it would take a few days to complete his analysis. The waiting was excruciating. While I waited, I decided it was time to talk to a neutral party, someone in the family who might be able to see the situation clearly. I chose my Aunt Carol, my dad's younger sister. She had always been a practical, no-nonsense woman. She loved her brother, and she had always been kind to me. But she was also someone who did not like to rock the boat. I knew she would be a tough sell. I called her that evening. I took a deep breath and laid out the whole story, from the letter the pastor showed me to the notarized codicil and my suspicions about Brenda's friend, Gina. I tried to keep my voice calm and factual, to present the evidence without letting my anger and grief overwhelm me. When I was finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Oh, Sarah," she finally said, and my heart sank. Her tone was one of pity, not belief. "That is a terrible accusation to make. Are you sure you are not just letting your grief get the better of you? Brenda has been a devoted wife to your brother for 10 years. Aunt Carol, I am sure," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. I knew my dad. He would not do this. And the fact that Brenda's best friend is the one who notarized the document, does that not seem strange to you? "Well, yes," she admitted, and I heard a flicker of uncertainty in her voice. "Gina? Brenda's friend Gina? That does seem convenient." It was not the full-throated support I had been hoping for, but it was a start. I had planted a seed of doubt in her mind. She promised to think about what I had said, and we ended the call. I felt drained, but also a little hopeful. If I could get Aunt Carol on my side, other family members might follow. A few days later, things escalated. I got a call from a neighbor who lived across the street from my dad's house. She was an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, and she had known me since I was a baby. "Sarah, dear, I did not want to bother you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. but there is a large truck in your father's driveway. They are moving things out of the house. I saw them carrying out all of his workshop tools." A cold fury washed over me. My dad's workshop was his sanctuary. He had spent countless hours in there, building furniture, fixing things, tinkering with his tools. Each one of those tools held a memory. The idea of Brenda selling them off to the highest bidder was more than I could bear. I thanked Mrs. Gable, hung up the phone, and immediately drove over to the house. Sure enough, there was a moving truck in the driveway. 2 men were carrying my dad's antique drill press down the driveway. I parked my car and stormed up to the front door. Brenda answered, a look of annoyance on her face when she saw me. "What do you want, Sarah?" she asked. "What are you doing?" I demanded, pointing to the truck. "You cannot sell his things. Those are his memories." "It is my house now, Sarah," she said, her voice cold and hard. "The will is clear. I need to clear out the clutter. It is part of the grieving process. You should try it sometime." Her cruelty was breathtaking. She was not just getting rid of his things, she was enjoying it. She was rubbing my face in her supposed victory. At that moment, something inside me snapped. The last vestiges of my hope for a peaceful resolution, for some kind of misunderstanding, vanished. This was a battle, and I was going to fight it with everything I had. "This is not over, Brenda," I said, my voice low and shaking with rage. "Not by a long shot." I turned and walked away, her smug smile burning in my memory. As I drove home, I knew I could not wait for the handwriting expert anymore. I had to take action now. I had to go after the notary, Gina. I had to find a way to prove that the notarization was a fraud. I just had no idea how I was going to do it. The key had to be Gina's notary logbook. I had done some research online. Every notary is required by law to maintain a journal or logbook of all their official acts. For each notarization, they have to record the date, the type of document, the name of the person signing, and most importantly, the signature of that person. The logbook was a public record. The problem was, I had no legal right to just demand to see it. Gina would never show it to me willingly. I needed a way to get a look at that book without her knowing. I was stumped. I felt like I had hit a brick wall. I called Jessica and explained the situation. "So we need to get a spy into her office," Jessica said, her mind immediately jumping to a solution. She had always been the more adventurous one in our friendship. "A spy?" I said. "Jess, this is real life, not a movie. Gina works out of a small insurance office. There is no way to just sneak in." "We do not have to sneak in," she said, a mischievous tone in her voice. "We just need a good excuse to be there, and I think I have one." She then proceeded to lay out a plan that was so audacious, so crazy, that it just might work. Jessica's cousin, Mark, worked for a large office supply company. His job was to service and repair office equipment, specifically photocopiers. And as luck would have it, his company had the service contract for the very insurance office where Gina worked. "So here is the plan," Jessica explained. "Mark calls the office and says he is coming in for a routine preventative maintenance check on their copier. It is something they do all the time, so it will not seem suspicious. While he is working on the machine, he will need Gina's help. He will create a paper jam, a really complicated one, that requires her to be looking at one part of the machine while he is looking at another." "And while she is distracted?" I prompted, my heart beginning to race. "While she is distracted, you will be there," Jessica said. "You will pretend to be a new trainee, Mark's apprentice. He will have you assisting him. Your job will be to get to her desk, find that logbook, open it to the right date, and take a picture of the page with your phone. You will have maybe 30 seconds max." It was a wild plan. So many things could go wrong. What if Gina did not leave the logbook on her desk? What if she got suspicious? What if we got caught? But as I thought about it, I realized it was my only shot. It was a risk, but I had to take it. I spent the next 2 days in a state of high anxiety. Jessica coordinated everything with her cousin Mark, who, to my surprise, was completely on board. He had heard the story from Jessica and was furious on my behalf. He said he would be happy to help take down a scammer. The day of the operation, I felt sick with nerves. I met Mark in a coffee shop a block away from Gina's office. He was a friendly, lanky guy in his late 20s, wearing a polo shirt with the office supply company's logo on it. He gave me a matching shirt and a fake ID badge that identified me as a trainee. "Ready to fix some copiers?" he asked with a grin. "I am terrified," I admitted. "Do not worry," he said. "I do this stuff all the time. The paper jam, I mean. Not the corporate espionage. Just stay calm, follow my lead, and we will be in and out before she knows what hit her." We walked over to the office building. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. The office was a small, drab space with 3 desks. A woman I assumed was Gina sat at the one by the window. She looked up as we came in. She was a woman in her 50s with bleached blonde hair and a hard look on her face. "We are here from Office Pro to do the routine maintenance on your copier," Mark said cheerfully, holding up his ID. "This is Sarah, my new trainee." Gina grunted. "It is in the back," she said, waving a hand toward a small copy room. Mark and I went into the room and closed the door. He got to work, opening up the copier and tinkering with it. I just stood there, trying to breathe normally. After a few minutes, he created the jam. He called out to Gina. "Ma'am, I am going to need your help with this," he said. "It is a nasty one, stuck deep inside. I need you to hold this panel open while I try to get at it from the other side." Gina let out an annoyed sigh and came into the copy room. She knelt down and held the panel open, her back to her desk. This was my moment. Mark gave me a subtle nod. I quietly slipped out of the copy room and walked over to her desk. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely function. I scanned the desk. It was cluttered with papers, but there it was, sitting right by her computer. A simple, black, spiral-bound notebook. The notary logbook. I picked it up, my fingers fumbling with the pages. I flipped through it, looking for the date Brenda had claimed my dad signed the letter. There it was. My eyes scanned the entry. The date was correct. The document type was listed as codicil to will. And then I saw the name of the signer, George Peterson. And next to it, in the signature column, was a signature. But it was not my father's. It was not even a good forgery like the one on the letter. It was a sloppy, rushed scrawl that looked nothing like his handwriting. It looked like someone had just scribbled a name, thinking no one would ever see it. Brenda, in her arrogance, had made a fatal mistake. She had spent all her time perfecting the signature on the document itself, but she had gotten lazy with the logbook. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I opened the camera app. I snapped a clear photo of the page. Then I closed the book, placed it exactly where I had found it, and slipped back into the copy room, just as Mark announced that he had cleared the jam. "All set," he said to Gina. "Thanks for your help." Gina stood up, grumbling. "About time," she said, and went back to her desk, completely oblivious. Mark and I packed up our tools and left. As soon as we were outside and around the corner, I leaned against the wall, my legs feeling like jelly. "Did you get it?" Mark asked. I nodded, unable to speak. I pulled out my phone and showed him the picture. This was it. This was the breakthrough. This was the undeniable proof that Brenda had lied. My father had not been at that office. He had not signed that logbook. Brenda had signed it herself. She had committed fraud, and I had the evidence to prove it. A wave of relief so powerful it almost brought me to my knees washed over me. I had her. Just as I was catching my breath, my phone rang. It was the handwriting expert. I answered, my heart pounding for a different reason now. "Miss Peterson," he said, his voice professional and direct. "I have completed my analysis, and I can state with 100% certainty that the signature on the letter you sent me is a forgery. It is a very skilled forgery, what we call a simulation, but it is not genuine. There are numerous microscopic indicators of forgery, including unnatural pen lifts and evidence of slow, drawn execution. The signature in the logbook you just sent me is also clearly not from the same hand as the authentic signatures. I can prepare a sworn affidavit to that effect. I closed my eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. I had it all. The expert witness and the fraudulent logbook entry. Two separate, irrefutable pieces of evidence. Brenda's web of lies was about to come crashing down around her. I thanked the expert and hung up the phone. I looked at Jessica's cousin Mark, a huge smile spreading across my face. "It is over," I said. "She is finished." I now had all the ammunition I needed. The expert's affidavit and the photo of the forged logbook signature were my weapons, but I did not want to just go to the police, not yet. That felt too impersonal. Brenda had made this deeply personal, and she deserved a personal reckoning. She had tried to humiliate me, to erase me from my own family. I wanted to expose her in front of the very people she had tried to manipulate. I wanted them to see her for the liar and the thief that she was. An opportunity presented itself just a few days later. Brenda, in her ongoing performance as the grieving widow, decided to host a memorial dinner for my father at the house. She invited the whole family: aunts, uncles, cousins, and of course, Pastor Mike. It was the perfect stage. She intended it to be a celebration of her role as the devoted wife. A way to cement her control over my father's legacy, but I was going to turn it into her downfall. I spent the days leading up to the dinner preparing. I had the expert's affidavit printed and notarized, by a legitimate notary this time. I had the photo of Gina's logbook blown up and printed in high resolution. I put them both in a crisp manila folder. I rehearsed what I was going to say over and over in my head. I needed to be calm, controlled, and factual. I could not let my anger get the better of me. When the evening of the dinner arrived, I dressed carefully. I chose a simple black dress, something that was respectful, but also projected an air of seriousness. As I drove to the house, my father's house, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The nervousness was gone, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. This was for my dad. Brenda greeted me at the door, her face a mask of practiced sympathy. "Sarah, I am so glad you could make it," she said, pulling me into a brief, awkward hug. "I know how hard this must be for you, but it is important that we all come together and remember your father. We have to move forward as a family." I just nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I walked into the living room, which was filled with relatives making polite conversation. I saw Aunt Carol across the room. She gave me a small, questioning look. I gave her a subtle nod in return. Pastor Mike was there, looking somber. Kevin was hovering by his mother's side, a drink in his hand. The dinner was a surreal affair. Brenda played the perfect hostess, gliding from person to person, sharing a tearful memory here, a brave smile there. She had even placed a large framed photo of her and my dad on the mantelpiece, a photo I knew my dad had always disliked. After the main course, Brenda tapped her wine glass with a spoon to get everyone's attention. She stood up, a single tear rolling down her cheek right on cue. "I just want to thank you all for being here," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It means so much to me to have you all here to honor George's memory. He was a wonderful man, a loving husband, and I know his final, heartfelt wishes were for this family to remain strong and united. I promise to honor those wishes, to carry on his legacy just as he asked me to." This was it. This was my moment. I took a deep breath and stood up, the manila folder in my hand. The room went silent. All eyes turned to me. "Brenda, I am glad you brought up my father's final wishes," I said, my voice clear and steady, "because I have some questions about this letter he supposedly wrote." Brenda's smile faltered. A flicker of panic crossed her eyes before she quickly masked it. "Sarah, this is hardly the time or the place for that," she said, her voice sharp. "I think it is the perfect time and the perfect place," I replied, my gaze sweeping across the room to include everyone. Everyone here loved my father. Everyone here deserves to know the truth. I turned to Pastor Mike. Pastor, you saw the letter? You believed it was my father's handwriting, did you not? He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Well, yes, he said. It certainly looked like it. I turned my attention back to Brenda, who was now staring at me with pure hatred. It was a very good copy, was it not? I said, my voice laced with ice. You must have practiced for a very long time to get it so perfect. Kevin stood up abruptly. What are you talking about? He said, his voice rising. She is hysterical, Mom. She is making things up. She is grieving, Brenda said quickly, trying to seize control of the narrative. She is not thinking clearly. We should not listen to this. Oh, I am thinking more clearly than I have in a month, I said, my voice ringing with confidence. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. I am thinking so clearly that I hired a forensic handwriting expert to analyze the signature on that letter, and he concluded with 100% certainty that it is a forgery. I held up the sworn affidavit for everyone to see. A collective gasp went through the room. Brenda's face went white as a sheet. That is ridiculous, she stammered. That is a lie. You paid him to say that. Is it? I countered, pulling out the second piece of evidence, the enlarged photo of the logbook. Then let's talk about the notarization. The letter was notarized by your best friend Gina, was it not? Well, I have a copy of her official notary logbook from that day. I held up the photo. The law requires the person signing the document to also sign the logbook in the notary's presence. There is a signature here, next to my father's name. But it does not look like his signature, does it? In fact, it does not even look like the forgery on the letter. It looks like someone was in a hurry. It looks an awful lot like your handwriting. Brenda. I walked over and handed the photo to Aunt Carol. She took it, her hands trembling slightly. She stared at the photo, then looked up at Brenda, her expression a mixture of shock and disgust. Brenda began to crumble. Her carefully constructed facade shattered, revealing the desperate, greedy woman underneath. This is insane, she whispered, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an ally. You are trying to ruin me. You are trying to turn everyone against me. I took a step closer to her, my voice dropping so that everyone had to lean in to hear. You tried to ruin me, I said, the words filled with all the pain and anger I had been holding back for weeks. You tried to erase me. You forged a letter to steal my inheritance, but it was not just about the money, was it? You wanted to steal my father's memory. You wanted everyone to believe that he died disappointed in me, that he did not love me. You wanted to rewrite our entire relationship to satisfy your own pathetic greed. But you failed. Because my father loved me. And that is the one thing you could never, ever forge. The room was utterly silent. Everyone was staring at Brenda. Pastor Mike looked at her with an expression of profound horror and disappointment. Brenda, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Is this true? She looked at him, then at Kevin, who was just staring at the floor, refusing to meet her gaze. She was cornered. There was no way out. Her lies had been laid bare for everyone to see. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she let out a strangled sob and sank into her chair, covering her face with her hands. It was a pathetic, last-ditch attempt at garnering sympathy, but no one was buying it. The performance was over. Aunt Carol stood up, her face a mask of cold fury. She walked over to Brenda's chair and looked down at her. Brenda, she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. You need to leave this house. My brother's house, now. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The memorial dinner ended abruptly, with family members leaving in a state of stunned silence. Brenda, humiliated and exposed, packed a small bag and left the house that night. She went to stay with her son, Kevin. The next morning, I called Mr. Thompson, the lawyer. I told him everything that had happened and emailed him copies of the evidence I had gathered. To his credit, he was horrified and deeply apologetic. He admitted that he had had his suspicions about the codicil, but that without any proof, His hands had been tied. Now, with the expert's affidavit and the fraudulent logbook entry, he had everything he needed. He immediately began the legal process to have the fraudulent codicil thrown out and to have my father's original valid will reinstated. He also informed me that he would be reporting both Brenda and Gina to the state bar and the district attorney's office for fraud and forgery. A few days later, Aunt Carol came over. She brought a homemade apple pie, my father's favorite. She wrapped me in a long, tight hug as soon as I opened the door. "I am so sorry, Sarah," she said, her voice filled with regret. "I am so sorry I ever doubted you for a second. Your father would be so proud of the woman you have become. You are strong, just like him." We spent the rest of the afternoon together, going through old photo albums and sharing stories about my dad. It was a sad but healing experience. For the first time since he died, I felt like I could grieve him properly, without the shadow of Brenda's lies hanging over me. We packed up the few things Brenda had left behind and put them in boxes on the porch for Kevin to pick up. Reclaiming the house, my childhood home, felt like a victory in itself. I did have one final conversation with Kevin. He called me a week later. He sounded lost and confused. "I do not understand why you had to do it that way, Sarah," he said. "In front of everyone. You could have just gone to the police." "She made it public when she went to Pastor Mike," I said calmly. "She tried to destroy my reputation and my relationship with my father in front of our entire community. She deserved to be exposed in front of that same community." "She is my mom," he said, his voice cracking. She was scared after he died. She was worried about her future." "She was not scared, Kevin," I replied, my patience wearing thin. "She was greedy, and she committed a serious crime. There are no excuses for what she did. She broke the law, and now she has to face the consequences." He did not have a response to that. We hung up, and I knew that was likely the last time we would ever speak. He had chosen his side. He would always be his mother's enabler. The legal consequences for Brenda were severe. She was charged with multiple counts of forgery and felony fraud. Gina, the notary, was also charged. She lost her notary license and her job at the insurance agency. The last I heard, Brenda had been forced to sell her own condo to pay for her legal fees. She was facing jail time. The social consequences were just as devastating for her. The story of her deception spread like wildfire through our family and the church community. She was completely ostracized, a pariah. The friends who had once flocked to her side now crossed the street to avoid her. She had lost everything: her home, her reputation, and the respect of everyone who had ever known her. With the fraudulent codicil invalidated, my father's true will was honored. The savings were divided exactly as he had told me they would be. And I finally received the box of my mother's jewelry, which Brenda had hidden in the back of her closet, no doubt intending to sell it. I decided not to sell my dad's house. I moved back in, and walking through the familiar rooms, I felt his presence everywhere. It was a comforting feeling. I spent weeks cleaning out his workshop, carefully wiping down each of his tools, arranging them back on the pegboard where they belonged. I even started to learn how to use some of them, a small way of keeping his memory alive. Brenda's goal had never been just about the money. I realized that as I settled back into my old life. She had been jealous of my relationship with my father. She had seen the bond we shared, a bond she could never hope to replicate, and she had resented it. She wanted to be the most important person in his life, and even after his death, she could not stand the thought that he had loved me so deeply. Her forged letter was an attempt to retroactively win a competition that had only existed in her own mind. She wanted to own his memory, to control the narrative of his life, but she had failed. My father's love was not something that could be written on a piece of paper or validated by a lawyer. It was in every memory I had, in every lesson he had taught me, in the very person he had helped me become. That was my true inheritance, the one thing she could never touch, and the one thing she could never forge. In the end, she learned a hard lesson. Some things in this world cannot be stolen. They have to be earned. and she had earned nothing but the ruin she now found herself in.